we are in fact remarkably ignorant about what's going on in our brain that makes all of this happen. And so the first person point of view is not a privileged position, it's underprivileged. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because if you had to try to understand everything going on in your brain, you wouldn't have time to do anything else.
Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm speaking with Professor Daniel Dennett about his magisterial memoirs, I've Been Thinking, about the world of philosophy and philosophers, the inside stories, covering materialism, naturalism, consciousness, free will, evolution, artificial intelligence, God and religion. Dan is an atheist. That's no spoiler. Welcome, Dan. It's great to see you again. Congrats on I've Been Thinking. I loved it. I felt I lived your life with you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be back with you, Robert.
All right. Well, let's start with just some quick opening questions, just as a little teaser. I loved your story about Chess, which probes philosophy. Chess is a variant of chess, as you've created it, where the king can move two squares, not one, which makes mate a little harder, of course. But no one studies chess.
No, as far as I know, nobody does. And certainly nobody plays it, or I don't think they do. I just invented it because it's a perfectly describable game. And just as there are many truths of chess, and people have spent their lives mathematically proving various things about chess, there are all the truths about Schmidt. And then there are the truths about the mistakes that people make in their arguments about Schmidt. And nobody does that. It's not worth doing. But I think a lot of philosophy is in danger of being Schmidt. It's a technically possible playpen for intellectual work. It's just not worth doing. The great Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb once said, "If it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well."
Yeah,
and I think a lot of
very profound.
I think a lot of philosophy is very well done by experts, but it's not clear that it's worth doing.
Okay, well, the flip side of that, and this is maybe a little more serious, you've had so many contributions in your philosophical career, really remarkable insights and new ways of thinking about stuff. And just as an opener, what are say three of your favorite insights or contributions? Very quickly, just give us an overview.
Very quickly. Well, certainly in Consciousness Explained, I described what I called Cartesian materialism and the Cartesian theater, the idea that there's a movie running inside your head. No, there isn't. There isn't. The last image in vision is on your retina, and after that, it's all spike trains, and there's no movie running in your head. There just seems to be. And a lot of people have a really hard time getting rid of the idea that there's a what I call a Cartesian theater running in their head. Another one of my ideas is the intentional stance, the idea that we can adopt the strategy of considering something to be an agent with beliefs and desires. You can consider a thermostat to be an agent, and its job is to keep the heat within a certain range. That's the sort of simplest agent you could have. But insects are agents, nerve cells are agents, we are agents, animals are agents, robots are agents, and it's a hugely simplifying but risky way of getting prediction and explanation about very complicated things. And I guess the third idea I would mention was just, if you're not a Darwinian, if you're not a post-Darwinian, you're missing the boat. So many issues in philosophy are transformed by an appreciation of what Darwin created.
Yeah, I think you made the comment once that Darwinism is the single greatest idea that humans have ever made.
If I
Uh,
could give a prize, I'd give it to Darwin. Yes.
yeah. Let me ask you a question, because we've been talking a little bit about alien intelligences, and would it be a principle of universal law like gravitation that Darwinian processes would affect life wherever it may be, however life may be radically different? Would that be a possible universal law?
Well, I think if you think about it right, yes. Um, uh, if you have chaos, then you have chaos, and if you get order and chaos, and nature will just create ratchets that will allow design to happen. That's
Mm,
a Darwinian process.
mm,
And the first thing that can reproduce then makes another copy, and that makes another copy, and that makes another copy. And maybe the first thing that reproduced took 1,000 years to reproduce. It doesn't matter. It has no competition. But
mm.
once the ball gets rolling, then you get life, and it may have many forms on other planets that are entirely unlike the forms. It might not be carbon based. We don't know, but she should be open-minded about that. But yes, I think Darwinism is the key to making interesting things happen in the universe. Without the Darwinian ratchet,
Mm.
it would be a very monotonous universe,
Mm.
as David Deutsch has pointed out.
Okay, let me just give a brief bio, Dan, and then we'll get into the real substance of the book and all of just the marvelous ideas and categories you've dealt with. Daniel C. Dennett is one of the world's leading philosophers, the university professor emeritus at Tufts University, and the author of path-setting books, all of which are great. Consciousness Explained, I'm just mentioning a few. Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomena, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking, and From Bacteria to Bach and Back, The Evolution of Minds. So, Dan, let's start with major topics. We'll start with consciousness. You take, I think would be fair to say, a deflationary approach to consciousness as a kind of illusion. But are your views caricatured as self-refuting? The idea being, if you have an illusion that you're conscious, you are conscious.
Well, thank you. Nicely put. Yes, my view is deflationary in an important sense, and that is I'm resisting the inflationary views of other people who just get it in their head, and this is an ancient idea, but Descartes made it central, that we know more about what's going on in our minds than anybody else could possibly know. We're sort of have papal infallibility about what's going on in our heads. No, we don't. No, we don't. Get rid of that idea and recognize that your brain can trick you, and you don't know where your thoughts are coming from. Right now, I'm speaking to you. The words are coming out of my mouth. I don't know how they're being produced. You're listening to them. You don't know what's happening in your brain that allows you to understand them. We are, in fact, remarkably ignorant about what's going on in our brain that makes all of this happen. And so the first person point of view is not a privileged position, it's underprivileged. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because if you had to try to understand everything going on in your brain, you wouldn't have time to do anything else. Evolution has sculpted our brains to give us information about what matters now, so we can save ourselves, so we don't fall over cliffs or get eaten by predators, and we can find our next meal and find a mate. These are the important things. And so our brains are tuned up to get really good information about the things that matter. And that means that we don't have good information about how it happens.
Is an analogy in a computer, or a weak one, but an analogy between machine language, compiling, and all the things until you get to a user interface in which we're dealing with little icons on the screen. But in reality, it's all machine language, which if we saw, we'd have no idea how it worked.
Exactly. The user interface is often called the user illusion because, there aren't little files that you can drag around in the computer. Files are in fact spread out all over your disk or your cloud storage. You don't need to know about that stuff. You have this illusion that everything is right in front of you, and the screen makes it visible to you. And the only difference between the user illusion of the computer and the user illusion going on in your brain is that since there aren't any eyes in your brain, there doesn't have to be a show going on in your brain. The brain, as it were, mainlines the illusion directly and responds to it. And if you saw how that was going on, you wouldn't understand that either.
You begin with talking about two problems that very early in your career, maybe even in your thesis ideas, that have been the fundamental drivers of really everything that you've done. The first being how clumps of molecules can be about something. The word has been coined an intentionality, which has a specific philosophical meaning, aboutness. And the second is how these clumps of molecules can be conscious and having this feeling of first-person actuality. And you had your first book, your thesis on content and consciousness, paper on intentional systems. So just frame for us, we'll talk about more these two kinds of problems.
Well, the first step I made, and it was sort of a lucky guess, maybe. I'm not sure. I was really sure that it was right. Content first, then consciousness. We want to understand content before we understand consciousness, because we have very simple things that have content, that respond to meaning in the world. And whether we're talking about a bacterium or an amoeba or a sea slug or a lobster, don't worry about consciousness. They have nervous systems, or they have systems that are sensitive to meaning, the meanings that matter to them. So that's content. That's intentionality. Consciousness is got to be built on top of that. It is a result, an effect of content, not the other way around. Now, one of my sternest critics and opponents over the years, John Searle, who turned that absolutely upside down and said, no content without consciousness. And I think that's, in a nutshell, the big difference between Searle and me. He thinks consciousness comes first, and I say, no, it's the sophisticated later arrangement. There have been contentful actions on this planet for over 3 billion years. Consciousness, our kind of consciousness, is a very recent phenomenon.
Now, I have followed both you and John Searle for 30 years now, and I absolutely agree with your distinction. But I would also say that you guys are sitting on the same side of the table in terms of what he would call biological naturalism and what you would call standard materialism or physicalism about the brain, as opposed to a whole large group of people who seem to be increasing in their at least influence, who say that that's not going to work, that you need something beyond the physicality, whether it's panpsychism or consciousness only, or a whole series of rather bizarre ideas. But in this primary question about the physicality of consciousness, you and Searle, are twins.
Yeah, we agree about that. But John hasn't tried to come up with a positive theory the way I have. So that's one of the big differences. Yes, it's sort of regrettable, but not surprising to see that now that materialism it reigns. Really, we've gotten rid of élan vital, vitalism, the idea that life is some magical, mystical spark. No, no, life is microbiological and chemical engineering all the way up. No mystery stuff, no wonder tissue there. And the same thing is true of consciousness. Now that's hard for many people to swallow because it means they have to give up the idea of the soul as a sort of pearl of special stuff. They want it to be magic. They want it to be real magic. That's part of the inflationism.
I love that in the book. Talk about the difference between real people want real magic, which is not real, and magicians, of course, do not real magic, but that is real.
Yeah.
Great part of the book. Great part.
My friend Lee Siegel, a wonderful philosopher and magician, wrote a book called Meta Magic, which is a great read. And in it, he has a little postscript where he says, "I'm writing a book on magic." My friends ask, "Real magic?" And I say, "No, not thaumaturgy, not magical spells, card tricks, sleight of hand, and so forth." And then he goes on to say, in other words, by real magic, they mean the kind of magic that isn't real. The kind of magic you can actually do is not real magic. And that's become sort of one of my main slogans. There's no real magic. The stagecraft, the brilliant design, the incredible, prodigious use of materials and so forth to make these things happen, that's unbelievably breathtaking and wonderful. Yeah. But it ain't magic.
All right, let's talk specifically about your theory of consciousness. As I've seen it, I see three kind of big ideas. Correct me, please. The first you've already been discussing: no Cartesian theater, no inner witness kind of viewing all this stuff, no inner movie. That's one. Second, that, and this is a key one, multiple drafts of content in the brain and different modules, or how we want to describe it, that vie for influence, that what hits our primary sense. And you have a nice term for that called fame in the brain, whichever becomes the most famous at any given moment. And then a third I see is the self as what you call a center of narrative gravity. So those three ideas seem to be the foundation of your theory.
Yeah, that's good. You've got it exactly right. As usual, you're a very astute reader. Let's talk about the self as a center of narrative gravity. Because actually, this is what's different about our brains compared with, say, a supercomputer, a digital computer. Digital computer has an operating system, and that lays down the law. This is what happens first. This is what happens next. It's very bureaucratic. There's a master traffic cop that directs things, that times things, that orders things, and that's where the strength of computers comes from. Turing has a wonderful sentence in his original piece on where he introduces the Turing test about how digital computers are super slavish followers of the rules that are built into them. Ain't nothing like that in your brain. There's no operating system. There's no master scheduler. It's all a competition in the brain. But out of that competition comes order, collaboration. Now, this is one of nature's great ideas, the idea of opponent processes, which one tugs one way, one tugs the other way, and they achieve a balance. That's how your eyes work. Which way do your eyes move? Your eyes move every few seconds. No, every few hundred milliseconds, about 4 or 5 times a second. And and that's controlled by muscles that are opponent muscles, move left, move right, move up, move down. But the muscles themselves are controlled in the frontal eye fields by cells that are basically saying, boring, been there, let me look somewhere else. And cells that say, no, I want to stay here. So there's little agents in there that are having a little battle over where your eyes should move next. And usually this is beautifully worked out, and you see just what you need to see when you need to see it. Your eyes dart around very fast. Now, magicians take advantage of that. They know how to get one set of those agents to look over here instead of over here. While they're doing something over here, they're getting you to look over here. And it works like a charm. In fact, one of the amazing facts of magic is that when you first learn how to do magic tricks, it's hard to believe in the power of conjuring. It's hard to believe that you can actually do things right in front of people's eyes that they don't see. But if you misdirect them right, you can stuff an egg into your mouth and nobody sees you putting it into your mouth because they're looking somewhere else at the moment you do it. It's just amazing.
Yeah, that's a wonderful examples you use in the book to let us understand that what we think the verisimilitude, the reality of what we think we see, we really don't. And magic is a wonderful way to express it. Now let's talk about our mutual friend Dave Chalmers, the hard problem, which you say evaporates, your term, I think, when hundreds of lesser problems are solved or in the process of solving scientifically, that the hard problem will increasingly dissolve or evaporate. Now, those scientific problems, Dave would call the easy problems. I think doesn't mean they're easy to do. They may take dozens and hundreds of years to do, but you have a clear way to go about understanding how those things work. But he would say, and many would say, that you solve all of those and you still haven't dealt with the phenomenology of consciousness.
Yeah, that's been David's line all along. And our mutual friend, David Rosenthal, a philosopher, one of my favorite lines from David Rosenthal was, the three of us, Chalmers, Rosenthal, and I, were walking in the desert at one of the Tucson meetings, and David Rosenthal said to David Chalmers, David, I love your distinction between the hard problem and the easy problems, except for one thing. He said, what's that? He says, you got the labels mixed. The easy problems are the hard problems, and the hard problem is the easy problem. There isn't any hard problem. And I have a wonderful analogy with magic here, too. And a magician named Ralph Hull many years ago had a card trick which he called the tuned deck. And the whole point, this was a trick he did just for his fellow magicians, and he bamboozled his fellow magicians for years. They wanted to buy the trick, he wouldn't sell it to them, and like a lot of magic, the trick is over before you even think it's begun. The trick is all in the name of the trick. And it's all in one of the three words. Not tuned or deck, it's the. What Hull did was he said, I've got a new trick. It's called the tuned deck. Trick's over. He now proceeds to do a trick that they actually all know.
But they think that it's something.
Yeah. But they think it's a new trick.
Yeah, and they can't.
So, and he does some falderall, buzz, and so forth. They know that's not it. But they get obstreperous. Magicians know how to foil other magicians' tricks. So they get obstreperous, they interfere, and they prevent him from doing, I'm not going to tell too much magic here. They prevent him from doing a type A trick. So they've eliminated that. Well, maybe he's doing a type B trick. So they prevent him from doing a type B trick. Well, maybe he's doing a type C trick, so they prevent him from doing a type C trick. Well, maybe he's doing a type D trick. They prevent him from doing a type D trick. They don't have any more hypotheses. Well, the fact is, he was doing an A trick the first time. The second time, he was doing a C trick, and then he went back to the A trick, and he's just staying ahead of them. And what they are not doing is realizing it's all the easy tricks. That's all he's doing. And it's a mistake of addition.
Yeah. You mentioned the Tucson conference toward a science of consciousness, which Stuart Hameroff and Dave Chalmers and others have put together. And
Yes.
I was at the 20th anniversary in 2014, and we did Close to the Truth. We did some shows there. We interviewed you. We had some great times. You made at that meeting, when you got up to speak, one of the cleverest remarks I've ever heard in my life. And I just loved it. You said, first thing you said, and you have to know the science of consciousness. There are a lot of serious scientists there and philosophers dealing with serious subjects. Obviously, you, Dave Chalmers, Stu Hameroff has his own ideas. But there's also a proliferation of literally dozens of people with the most bizarre ideas that post their things. And you got up and you said, I feel like a policeman at Woodstock.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my favorite lines.
Actually, a little better than that, because I said, now I know what it is like.
Ah, better.
What it was like to be a policeman at Woodstock.
Right.
Yeah.
That is better. That's great. Now, look, I have to give Dave a little bit of airtime here. And he had a remark at that same conference about you, which I thought was very funny. And he sort of said, we're at this conference, the hard problem, everybody has crazy theories about a hard problem. He was referring to himself and panpsychism. Every theory is crazy. He said even Dan Dennett has a crazy theory about the hard problem because he thinks it doesn't exist.
Yeah, yes, I remember that. Well, Dave and I are on good friendly terms. Unlike a few of my other critics, we're still good friends. Although we make no bones about the fact we think each other is bonkers. One time he said, "Dan, I know your arguments, and I don't have any knockdown, drag out refutation of them, but I can't accept them. I just can't accept them." And I said, okay, I won't bother trying those arguments out on you anymore, David. Have you considered a change of diet?
or the water?
He didn't appreciate that, but
you talk about two ideas that you said you take a middle ground between, and it relates directly to these points. On the one hand, you have Jerry Fodor's, a very distinguished psychologist who sadly is no longer with us. You said between Jerry Fodor's industrial strength realism about consciousness and the eliminativism or limited materialism of Pat and Paul Churchland. And you talk about your ways of thinking as a middle ground between these ideas. Why is that?
Mild realism. Jerry's idea was that if you really have beliefs, it's got to be because you've got these things like sentences in the head written in the language of thought. Mm-hmm. And I thought, no, that's just too strong. That's I one time called it hysterical realism, but that's a no term these days. And so I wrote a paper called Real Patterns, which is about reality. It's about what makes something real. And something's real if there's a pattern that you can detect that allows you to do better than chance at predicting what the next part of the pattern is. It's if you've got complete chaos, complete randomness, then you can't predict the next item in the series at all. You can't predict the next pixel on the screen. But real patterns are any simplification that gives you a little edge. So the intentional stance finds all kinds of real patterns, and they're just as real as dollars and voices and baseball games.
Mm.
What's the Moonlight Sonata made of? It's a pattern. Is it a pattern of notes on a page? Is it a pattern of sounds on the piano? It's the same pattern, differently materially realized, but they're all real.
And how does that articulate with eliminativism?
Oh, good. Eliminativism is a sort of puritanical view. It says there's just atoms in motion and physics and maybe neurophysiological signaling, but let's just get rid of this intentional stance altogether. There really aren't any beliefs, and there really isn't any consciousness. And some people might go on and say, yeah, we're all really zombies. Well, I say the very idea of a zombie is confused. If you mean a creature with a Cartesian theater and a dualistic mental life, yeah, then we're all zombies. But we're reflective, speaking zombies, and the only difference between that kind of zombie and a so-called normal human being is that whereas the normal human being has a stream of consciousness, the zombie has a stream of unconsciousness, which has all the same properties, all the same powers. Consciousness is a functional notion, and you don't need to have any mystery for that.
Let's go into a little bit more depth on illusionism and what that word means in your theories. I know you referred to Anil Seth's controlled hallucination. We've talked to Anil about that as one example. The user interface, virtual machine, in enriching the idea of illusion, because illusion has a connotation in common discourse, which I know you don't mean.
Yeah, many of my best friends and supporters say, Dan, drop the word illusionism, which I've been using recently. And I've decided maybe this is a tactical error. No, I think the younger generation understands about user illusions, realizes that user illusions are good things, that they make life easier. They help you control and understand things. And we're not victims of them. We're blessed with user illusions, which make the world easier to deal with. And the whole idea of the Internet of Things and so forth, it's creating valuable user illusions. Color vision is a user illusion. Atoms aren't colored, we know that. But thank goodness we have this illusion of color, and it's as real can be. But it's also it's a real illusion. And it's a very valuable one. And the people who don't have color vision are missing a whole lot. But they're not missing the intrinsic redness of anything, because there's no such thing as intrinsic redness.
When I've considered your whole approach to user illusion, I had this odd resonance because I've talked to Donald Hoffman, who I'm sure you know, who uses a similar argument about the user illusion to support precisely the opposite conclusion, which is not only that consciousness that consciousness is the only reality, that everything else is the part of the user illusion. So he's using the user interface and the user illusion to come to literally diametrically the opposite conclusion, which is that the only thing that exists at all is consciousness.
Yeah, well, I think he's just overstepped. It's whoops, he just went one step too high. Otherwise, I think he has some good ideas, but I think he we all make mistakes, and I think that's his mistake is just taking a good idea and pushing it a little too far, which is what people should try to do.
Yeah, good. No, I absolutely agree with that. That's what we try to do on Closer to Truth. We try to push ideas as far as we can and see what happens. That's the fun of what we do, and look a little bit beyond the horizon in all the areas that cosmos, consciousness, meaning, all of these things. See what happens with rational thought. I mean, people always ask us to feature this person or that person, and I look at it and it just, even though the idea might be interesting, it just doesn't pass the rational test, that this is not someone's opinion that would make sense. I mean, that's an arbitrary judgment. Have you been surprised by the growth of what seems to be strong growth of panpsychism among philosophers? Not just Dave Chalmers, Galen Strawson, who writes, very interesting and strong papers, Philip Goff, others who have sort of gotten on this bandwagon. The more neuroscience has progressed, as I've followed it, and since my doctorate in neuroscience, almost 55, 60 years ago, as neuroscience has progressed enormously. But during this period of time, panpsychism, which is sort of the refutation of the success of neuroscience in an ultimate sense, has increased.
Yeah, I don't know whether I've been surprised. I've been disappointed, of course, but one way to look at it is this is what philosophers do. They dig in their heels and they bravely put forward whatever view goes against what seems to be the growing consensus, because the growing consensus just might be wrong, and they're going to stake their claim on being the grand refuter of something that they think is getting ahead of steam that it doesn't deserve. And sometimes that's the thing to do, but you pay a big price for that. You're looked at as sort of wacky. I have a one-sentence refutation of panpsychism as a theory. Philosophers talk about theories, but usually a philosophical theory is just a slogan. There's nothing more to it than it's a well-honed slogan, but it doesn't predict anything in particular. It just sits there and glistens and defies you to refute it. Well, my question to panpsychists is, here's another theory, which I call to panpsychism. My alternative to panpsychism is pan-niftyism. Every atom, every electron, every photon, every rock is nifty. Everything's nifty. Everything's nifty. Now, tell me what follows from your theory that doesn't follow from mine.
On this, I'd have to say again that you and John Searle are bedmates on this. John had a comment that panpsychism is like spreading a thin layer of jam across all of reality. Obviously,
yeah, that's good. I like that. John can turn a phrase.
You talk about slogans, and I'm just going to throw some of these slogans at you that sometimes you are classified as or accused as, and so just give me your quick sense, yes or no. How do you feel about the following terms? I came up with 4 of them, some from your book. Are you a verificationist? Are you a functionalist? Are you an eliminative materialist? And are you a behaviorist? So those 4, any of those, none of the above.
Yes and no on all. And now I'll go.
So that's
I'll go
interesting.
back.
Yes and no is interesting.
The idea that there's a reality beyond verification that there are things in themselves that we can never know.
Yeah.
It's a possible idea, and there are many things we'll never know. I don't doubt that for a minute, but that there's something which is systematically unknowable and beyond any, its presence makes no difference. That's the idea that verificationism, in a very weak and gentle form, says baloney. Baloney. If it exists, it makes a difference, and if it makes a difference, you can. If you can't detect the difference, then what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people are verificationists about, for instance, the theory that there are exactly seven invisible gremlins inside every piston of every gas-powered engine. And they don't add to the horsepower. They don't take up any space, but they're there. They're there. We just wave that aside. That's baloney. That's not worth talking about. Philosophers talk about things that aren't worth talking about a lot.
Okay,
say that they're not worth talking. So there's verificationism. Functionalism, yeah. Functionalism, though, is sort of tricky because there's tight versions of functionalism, and then there's broader versions of functionalism. Does a misfunction or a malfunction count as a function? Some of the most important phenomena in the mind are examples of dysfunctioning or malfunctioning systems. But in order to understand them, you have to understand them as the system as a whole as a functional system.
Yeah, I think it's using function in two different ways, because something that's malfunctioning, you can have a functionalist understanding of that quite easily.
Exactly. The term epiphenomenalism is actually historically misused.
That's a good one.
When it was first introduced, it was the sound, the whistle made by a steam engine, not the toot toot whistle, but just the accompanying sound of the steam going through the engine, and that was an epiphenomenon. It wasn't playing any functional role. It was playing a causal role. And, you could pick it up on your tape recorder if you had a tape recorder. There weren't any in those days. You can hear it. It could even make you go deaf, but that wasn't a function. So epiphenomena were effects which weren't functions, like the color, like the color of the handle of your knife.
Yeah,
it can be any color, but the color has an effect, but it's not a function. Well, I'm a functionalist in the sense which says things don't all have to have functions, but they have to have effects. That's the verification in me. Verificationist in me, and the functionalist is, and you won't understand most anything interesting in the world if you are also a functionalist, because things have functions.
Yeah, the use of functionalist
has functions and also malfunctions.
The use of functionalist in the consciousness world is that it's multiply realized in different media. It doesn't have to be in a physical brain. And functionalism, therefore, in the consciousness studies, would have great implications for artificial intelligence, which we talk about a little bit later.
Here's an interesting new tidbit. I use the word fungible to talk about function because that's actually the root. But some things are fungible and some things aren't. If you own a painting worth $1 million and you loan it to me, and instead of giving you the painting back, I give you $1 million. No. I have to give you back the very thing that you loaned me. That's a non-fungible thing. Well, now, is there any part of the brain that's non-fungible? Is there any part of or any mental thing, is there any part of the brain that couldn't, in principle, be replaced with, wire and silicon and some other chemistry? And the functionalist says, no. In principle, you could make a brain, out of silicon and transistors and so forth, as long as it does all the functions.
Right. And you subscribe to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
as for behaviorism, all science is behavioristic. Let's think about weather. Once you've explained all the behavior of the weather, the humidity, the wind, the damage, the rain, the heat, the ozone layer and all that, once you've explained all the behavior, that's it. There's nothing left to explain.
Yeah, the difference in behaviorism is that you deal with the first person experience, which theoretically the weather doesn't have. So that would be.
But then,
and that's I think that's your point. That's your point.
Yeah, we deal with the first person experience in people with heterophenomenology, which looks at all the effects of first person experience on the world. That's how we know consciousness exists. That people can tell us about it. Martian behaviorists who came, suppose they weren't, no, I don't even know how to make sense of this, but suppose very, very different intelligent beings came in, they studied us, and they learned our languages. They'd know all about human consciousness, because how do we know about human? By talking to each other, reading novels, first person point of view novels, and by saying, "Ow, that hurts. Where does it hurt, Johnny?" and so forth, and putting probes in the body and giving people aspirin. All of this, the sum total of that, it's all behavior.
And the question is there something more beyond that? Behaviorism with Skinner had a great run. It was the primary way of thinking, and then it fell into either disrepair or distaste. Noam Chomsky had a role in that, and people sort of now look at behaviorism as a theory like logical positivism. It sort of ran its course.
And here's an interesting parallel with panpsychism. It's a good idea gone one step too far.
Yeah.
Skinner was, in a sense, right about behaviorism. That's all there is. But his attempt was to define it all without using any intentional terms and without using any functional terms.
Right.
And that just doesn't work. So you have to relax a bit about what you think is real, but then when you do that, you don't then add magical mystery stuff to the middle. There ain't any of that. Skinner was right about that.
You do say this is a great time to be working on consciousness, and I just want to throw at you some of the current neurophysiological kinds of theories and get your sense of which you like or don't like, or how you think they articulate with your overarching mechanisms and way of working. So there's the global workspace theory, integrated information theory that Giulio Ciccone and Christoph Koch work on, higher order theories, predictive theories. There are lots of others too, but those are some of the major categories.
And I think there's something right about each one of them. Mainly, I think the global workspace theory is on the right track. As I say in Consciousness Explained, and I've worked with Stan DeHaan and others on various things and suggested experiments. Basically, if I have to take sides in those battles, I'm on the global workspace side.
Okay.
Giulio Tononi's idea about integrated information theory is an interesting idea, but I think it's not really a practical idea. It's mathematics that can't really be put to use, as I understand it. I've talked about this with some heavy-duty mathematicians and computer scientists, and they've pretty well convinced me that it's not smoke and mirrors, but it's but it's not practical. I'll tell you one thing about it, which I think is at least insightful. Compare a brace of oxen pulling a wagon to a sperm whale. Now, the brace of oxen, there's two integrated senses. There's the one on the left and the one on the right, and they're independent even if they're coordinated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think of a sperm whale with one eye on each side of this head. Melville has a passage in Moby Dick where he speculates that maybe a sperm whale is dexter and sinister. There's basically two consciousnesses. There's the left consciousness and the right consciousness in here. And he observes behavior where sperm whales get confused and they seem to be fighting like a pair of oxen in their yoke, not being able to pull together. And, there might be some truth to that. You can blindfold a rabbit and teach the left eye one thing and the right eye is completely naive. So this is the idea of integration as playing a role in consciousness, I think, is itself a good idea. But I don't think the mathematics I might be wrong about this, but I don't think it really pays off much.
I see integrated information theory as really two distinct ideas that have sort of been yoked together. One is a test of the presence of consciousness, the phi, and with the mathematical, and that might affect comatose patients and very useful. The other is what literally the conscious precept is, and there are some complex ideas about nth dimensional space or whatever, that each precept is its own. So I think those are two kind of radically different ideas that have been put together, but not, that's another conversation. I want to ask you also about your buddy Nicholas Humphrey, who's a good friend of Close to the Truth and us as well, because he has obviously you certainly agree on the materialistic approach, but his approach is that consciousness is not a gradient. Now, he admits it's speculative, but it is a very late evolutionary step function kind of development, so that perhaps only mammals and birds have phenomenal consciousness, whereas other forms of life have a cognitive consciousness, but not phenomenal consciousness.
Well, I think there's a lot to what Nick says. I don't like the phenomenal cognitive distinction. I don't think that's been well drawn. But I do think that he's right, that consciousness in the form that we know from being human beings is so hugely different from the consciousness, say, of a lobster or a fish or a snail or a worm, that is that a sharp distinction? No, it's not a sharp. Here's where maybe we disagree. I think, like all these, there are gradations in nature. The very few bright lines in life, but I think there's a huge difference, and I think he's right that warm-blooded animals, with the extra energy they have added dimensions, powers, and problems to consciousness that other creatures don't have.
Okay.
And one of the interesting marks of this is whether they play. There's wonderful video of birds playing, sliding down snowy roofs and doing other sorts of amazing things, and of course mammals, otters and monkeys and so forth. It's not sharp, but it's worth taking seriously. I think that human consciousness and dog consciousness are more similar than human consciousness and chimp consciousness. Because we have unconsciously selected dogs to be more human.
Mm-hmm.
They're much more sensitive to pain than, say, wolves. A wolf,
it's interesting.
A wolf will gnaw its own paw off to get out of a trap. Dog won't do that. So I think humans and dogs suffer more than any other animal. That's a very convenient view, but I think it's probably true.
Dan, we could talk for 2 weeks. I just love talking about all these subjects, and I have about 10 more subjects, the equivalent of what we've talked about consciousness. So we don't have time. So what I want to do is just list some of the other areas that you've focused on that I'm fascinated by, and just get your quick reaction to each one. And we'll start with free will. Obviously, you're a physicalist and a determinist, and at the same time strongly support your kind or a kind of free will, not a libertarian free will that you could do otherwise, but you make the point that determinism does not mean inevitability. Half the time I really understand that. Half the time I don't.
Well, inevitability, of course, if you look at etymology, it means unavoidability. So let's look at avoiding. Does anything avoid anything? Oh, yeah. Look at life. Antelopes avoid the teeth of lions, and fish avoid the net. And avoiding is one of living things' greatest powers. And we can also make robots that avoid things, and chess-playing computers that avoid things. So evitability, not inevitability, is manifestly real. Some things are controlled and some things aren't. The things that are controlled can avoid things, and the things that aren't controlled just bounce down the hill or whatever. And they can't. A rock rolling down a mountain can't avoid anything. A skier skiing down the mountain can avoid things. Now,
all of that makes sense for sure, but it doesn't seem to affect the definition, at least of hard determinism, where at any given moment in a closed physical system there is a next sequence of state of affairs of everything, which is non-avoidable.
Well, yeah. If you look down at the ultra microscopic level, you find that's true, but that's the only level at which that makes any difference.
So does that mean you're a top-down kind of a theorist, that the top-down has causal impact, that all the bonds up together?
No, it's not quite that. It's not saying that utter indeterminism reigns at the top. It just says that if you want to know the competences of things, you don't want to look at the basic causal level. You want to look up a level or two.
But is that not like a user interface illusion then?
It's an extremely useful illusion. Life depends on it.
Yes, agree.
So it's a real illusion that life depends on, that we are avoiders.
Okay.
And determinism not only doesn't hinder that, it aids it. If you want to avoid a lightning strike, the randomness of lightning strikes, from your point of view, is a hindrance. You don't know where to duck. You don't know which way to zig or zag. You can escape from predictable disasters. You can't escape from unpredictable ones. Now, what I think the problem is that people, philosophers mainly, but other people, they've realized that it's very important to be unpredictable. If you're predictable, you're a money pump. You're doomed. You're going to be taken advantage of by controllers. If you want to control yourself, you have to hide your controls from others. That's part of mathematical theory of games by von Neumann and Morgenstern. And people have taken that idea absolutely right. And they've elevated it, and they've said, but you don't really have free will unless you're absolutely unpredictable. No, you just have to be unpredictable by whatever is in the neighborhood. If you're unpredictable by whatever is in the neighborhood, you got some elbow room.
Impossible to do a statistical analysis, but I would think that most philosophers who are hard determinists are not compatibilists in the real sense.
No, I don't think so. I think compatibilism is actually the dominant view in philosophy, but who's counting? It's a majority.
I would say you're a radical compatibilist, or a compatibilist realist, or compatibilism realism, or something like that. That it's a real something. It's not just an artificial something.
Yeah. As real as colors and dollars.
Okay, let's talk about artificial intelligence, AI. I just commend the book, which I didn't expect to be so rich in its understanding of the history of artificial intelligence. Dan, you've been involved in this, and I didn't realize chairing various committees over the years and contests. It's really a special benefit of this of Dan's memoirs is to follow the history of the Turing test, what's called Digita-Dan, where Dan's works have been 1 million words have been put to the large language modules to learn and fooling people. It's a wonderful education about AI in Dan's book. It's a special benefit. I just want to ask you one question about, maybe two. One is the possibility or probability of AI consciousness, in using the term consciousness exactly as you would use the term for a human being. Is that possible in principle? And if it's in principle, it obviously will happen with scientific advances. Second question is AI danger, which a lot of people are talking about, and I think you're a little less concerned than perhaps some others. So AI consciousness, AI danger.
Absolutely, AI consciousness is possible. Look, we're robots made of robots, made of robots, made of robots. And so in principle, we could make a conscious robot. But my slogan is we want smart tools, not artificial colleagues. And we want smart tools, not artificial colleagues, so that we don't have any compunctions about
why would they be artificial if it's the exact same kind of consciousness that we have? What's the difference?
Because it was made by artifice, that's all.
Well, is that any different than the artifice of sexuality to make babies?
There's some important differences. A lot of top-down design goes into artifices that doesn't go into. There's some really big differences. You are made of trillions of robots that have agendas, cells, and motor proteins and things like that. That the motor proteins aren't even alive, but you couldn't live without them. And the result is a coordinated system which has no operating system, which cobbles together a collaborative détente operating system. Some people go deranged. Some people get obsessive. Some people lead very controlled lives. Just enough. An artificial system, if we could make one that was as chaotic in its depth as we are, that's very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. And don't worry about whether it's conscious. Don't worry about whether it's sentient. Worry about the fact that it can reproduce. That's what really worries me. Is that AI is making counterfeit people that will fool us. And whether they're sentient or not, just that's a red herring. They're dangerous. They can destroy trust. They can turn us all paranoid. The more we live in the virtual world where we don't know whether we're talking to real human beings or cheap knockoff semi-hemi-demi persons, if we can't tell the difference there, we're in deep trouble.
Well, yeah, but that's the first stage. But if you let that process go on and it becomes,
it'll get worse.
Well, I mean, I'm not. That's a value judgment, but it depends how you define it. I mean, it could get better, and the chaos that you're talking about can become more refined, and maybe that's the Darwinian future. I'm just trying to. I'm just trying to see what follows from the arguments you're making.
Well, the reason I think it'll get worse is because you have to remember the main question you always want to ask about Darwinian process. Cui bono, who benefits? Right now, we have lots of fake people, deep fakes. And they're very easy to reproduce. One of the scariest things about AI is the ease with which digital things can be perfectly reproduced. Well, do they mutate? Yes. Well, if they reproduce and mutate, then there are going to be more of them. Which ones are there going to be more of? The ones that mutate and replicate faster and better and more efficiently, that trick us, that get us to be the vectors, the midwives of their birth. And those are going to be ones that attract our attention and control our attention, and there's no reason to suspect they have any care for us at all. They're going to be viruses. Viruses aren't alive. We know they reproduce. And we know that although most viruses, 99.99999% of viruses are harmless, the ones that are harmful are one of the greatest threats on the planet. And these are going to be digital viruses that reproduce. They're memes. They don't have our interests at heart, and we can't make them have our interests at heart.
But so you're
domesticated or not? As Darwin said, you domesticate something if you control its reproduction. Are we controlling their reproduction? No. That's why we need laws. That's why we need very strict laws with teeth. That's why the big companies went to Congress and begged for regulation. And the Congress said, we've never seen an industry ask for regulation before. That's because the people on the inside in AI realize that they've let the genie out of the bottle. We've got the sorcerer's apprentice. Those brooms are multiplying very fast. And it's going to be an awful pandemic of counterfeit people if we don't take steps now.
The argument is what's better for human life, human beings. It's not an argument for what would make a better grand state of affairs of the universe, because that system could be better in some ways than human beings.
Right, right.
So
And
it's a
the
self
dinosaurs.
I'm on your
Dinosaurs.
side. I'm on your side. I want to preserve,
Yeah, yeah.
children. But in the great scheme of things, I'm not sure that has a logical foundation.
Yes, and that's a point of view that can be that's a perspective that can be adopted. Doug Hofstadter has a wonderful paper called "Who Will Be We in." What year did you say? It may have been even 2023, which is this year. I'll have to go back and look what the year was in the title, where he imagined a world where artificial intelligences became the preservers of poetry and music and opera and mathematics and so forth, and our human descendants became more oafish and stupid and anti-intellectual and destructive. And he could imagine a future where we would prefer that our digital offspring, our brain children, replace our biological children. Mm-hmm. So that's a possible future, and I have some sympathy for that view, but I think in the process, the damage, it may well lead to the, if not the extinction, the degradation of human beings in a terrible way.
Yeah, just a few words about breaking the spell. We don't have much time to talk about it in terms of your work on idea memes, viruses of the mind, the spell of religion, and why that needs to be broken. But I want to focus on one thing in the book which struck me in that section. And we've talked about religion and God in previous discussions we've had over the years. But you said, and this might have been the only time in your book that you said this, because every other topic you're brimming with enthusiasm and with love and excitement about the nature of the subject. But here you said the work that you did specifically after the book came out was not a labor of love, but more of an obligation. And you said you actually even had some regret over the amount of time that you spent, because that's the opportunity cost of our lives.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad you mentioned that. It was Richard Dawkins that sort of first put me onto the idea of writing about religion, and he wrote a piece for The Guardian, and I wrote a piece for the New York Times, and it drew a lot of attention, and people began urging me to write a book about religion and about atheism. Well, I didn't want to write a book about atheism because I think that's a boring subject. It's shooting fish in a barrel. But I did think that I could apply my ideas about evolution and consciousness and cultural evolution to the phenomenon of religion as a natural phenomenon. It is a natural phenomenon, and it should be studied the same way the petroleum industry and the banking industry and diplomacy and who knows what should be studied. It should be studied objectively and with all the tools at our disposal. No kid gloves, no hands off. So that's the point of the title, Breaking the Spell. You should look at religion with the same steely, hard eye that you use when you look at viruses and banking and capitalism and every other important topic. And so I wrote Breaking the Spell. And then I had to spend some time doing what I call book maintenance, defending it against misrepresentation and critics that were trying to distort its message and so forth. And what that did is it took me off I was sitting pretty in the world of consciousness and brain research when I started that project. And I lost about four years
Mm.
where I devoted my time to that labor of obligation. Now I've clawed my way back. I'm pretty near the top again, but that's thanks to the wonderful Canadian Institute for Advanced Research group on mind, brain, and consciousness that I've been the senior advisor to for a number of years. It's kept me in contact with the cutting edge of the field, and it's been a great joy of my life.
Well, that's terrific, Dan. I look forward to continuing our conversation. Many other things that you've had, just to list them, how humor can re-engineer the mind, a lot of wrong ideas that other people have had that you've, particularly in evolution, that to me are very exciting. But I'd like to maybe conclude with a couple of things. First of all, what you call a stable solution to a lot of the problems that first starts with materialism reigns, and then that the major problems of consciousness, meaning, and free will all have, and I think I'm quoting you, all have accounts that owe more to biology than to physics.
Yeah. Yeah. Physics is one layer too deep to see the patterns that make all the difference. If a physicist could do a Laplacian account of Wall Street, nobody could understand it. If you want to understand Wall Street, you have to talk about money and greed and foresight and prediction and so forth. You have to go up several layers to understand that. And so we have to understand that we live in a world that has these amazing tiers or layers of complexity, from atomic physics, subatomic physics, all the way up to poetry and music and art and humor. And to put them all into one big picture is, to me, that's what philosophy's job is. One of my favorite quotes is from Wilfrid Sellars, who once defined philosophy as the study of how things, in the broadest sense of the term, hang together in the broadest sense of the term.
Wonderful.
And that means, how do home runs and Christmas carols and poems and revolutions and catastrophes live in the same world with molecules and atoms and photons? If you can see all the different layers, even dimly, even with mistakes, lots of mistakes, that's the goal.
Your last chapter is "What If I'm Wrong," which is a wonderful way to conclude, and a wonderful idea for philosophers. As they say, a philosopher would rather use another philosopher's toothbrush than his nomenclature. One of my favorite lines about philosophy. So here's my question. Would you like to there have been or be a God with life after death? And I want to pose different people. When I talked to Steven Weinberg, one of the great thinkers of our lifetime, sadly no longer with us, I had the sense he lamented the fact that there was no meaning. He wasn't happy about it. He was very sorry. He was sure it was true that there was no meaning. The more we learn about the universe, the more how pointless we see, his classic line. But he felt very bad about that. On the other hand, Tom Nagel and Marvin Minsky affirmatively say they don't want God. Marvin told me that the reason he didn't want God is that if there were a God, he'd have to give God credit for the mathematical theorem that he had developed, and he didn't want to share the credit.
Yeah.
So that's typical Marvin.
For me, I'm firmly in the camp of Tom and Marvin. It's not a trickle-down theory of wonderfulness. It's a bubble-up theory of wonderfulness. Why should meaning be better if it is dependent on the meaning of some unbelievably magnificent, super duper God. We make meaning. The fact that we make meaning is fantastic. That we can make meaning. You have lifeless planets where there is no meaning. We are unbelievably fortunate to live on a planet where meaning has grown and grown and grown and grown and grown. And now we live in a splendid world filled with riches. And that's wonderful. And one of the best things about it is it doesn't last forever. Take advantage of it while you can. Add to the meaning. Pay it forward. Make a little more meaning for others to see. Help others see the meaning that's all around us. That's the best thing that's the best thing we can do.
Dan, many thanks. I always love talking to you. It is a terrific book. I really recommend it to everyone on so many levels. I've been thinking, please spend some time with the life of Daniel Dennett. It will be a great joy and a great elucidation of so many ideas for everyone. Viewers can watch Daniel Dennett in 12 Closer to Truth TV episodes and 22 exclusive videos on the Closer to Truth website and the Closer to Truth YouTube channel. Dan, thanks again so much. It's great to see you. All the best. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Thank you, Robert. As usual, you ask fantastic questions.
Thank you. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and comment below. You can support Closer to Truth by subscribing.